I don't know when it started, perhaps that's the problem. People usually say things like, "It was the day everything changed," or "It happened one fateful night." But for me, there was no moment I could point to, no single event I could trace back to as the source of it all. It just happened. Or rather, it keeps happening. But I need to go back. Let me explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. No, of course, it wasn't. How could it have been? I woke up that day just like any other. The sun was filtering in through the blinds, casting its familiar golden glow onto the wooden floors. The scent of coffee lingered in the air. I heard the sounds of the street outside, the usual hum of life in the city. I could hear the birds calling, someone's car alarm going off in the distance. There was nothing about the morning that hinted at the nightmare I was about to slip into. But the moment I stepped out of bed, it felt wrong. It was as though the world had subtly shifted, though I couldn't place why. It wasn't something as obvious as the smell of the air or the layout of the room. No, it was deeper than that, like something just out of sight had been changed, waiting for me to notice. I didn't think much of it at first, chalking it up to a restless night or some other trivial explanation. After all, the mind plays tricks on you when you're sleep-deprived. But then, as I made my way to the kitchen, I saw the newspaper on the counter. The date was the same as yesterday's paper. I picked it up, just to be sure. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages, but I didn't let myself dwell on it. Surely, I was imagining things. I made my coffee, sat at the table, and went through the motions of my morning routine. But the unease clung to me. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 7:42 a.m. I took a sip of coffee. It was only then that I realized something else, something far more unsettling. It wasn't the paper, or the clock, or even the way the birds had sounded. It was the silence. The air felt too still, as if the world was holding its breath. Later that day, the dread really began to settle in. It was small things at first, the man on the side of the road, for instance. I didn't know who he was, but he looked familiar in an unsettling way. His face had that vacant expression, one of someone who had long given up on anything but survival. He waved at me as I drove by. His hand trembled slightly in the afternoon light, and the desperation in his eyes was unmistakable. The scene replayed in my mind as I drove away. Why had I not stopped? Why didn't I pull over? It wasn't like me. The man had clearly needed help, and I had simply continued driving, pretending I didn't see him. But something told me it wasn't over. I couldn't shake the thought. I kept checking the rearview mirror, as if expecting him to follow me. I felt a tightness in my chest as I entered the intersection ahead, only to see him again. He was there, in the same spot, waving frantically. I slammed the brakes. The tires screeched as I jerked to a stop, the car lurching forward, my heart pounding in my throat. I was out of the car before I realized it, running toward the man, but it was already too late. The white light blinded me, and everything went black. When I came to, the world had returned to its usual shape. The man was gone. The road was empty, except for a faint smell of burnt rubber that lingered in the air. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel. I looked around, searching for something, anything, that could explain what I had just experienced. But there was nothing. Everything was normal. Too normal. The clock in my car blinked 7:42 a.m. again. I thought I had lost my mind. There was no other explanation. I had to be hallucinating, or worse, dreaming. But when I blinked, I saw the world around me with perfect clarity. No distortions. No lingering fog. Everything was sharp and real. I shook my head and checked the rearview mirror. Still nothing. No man. Nothing. I turned the radio dial to break the silence, but the static crackling back at me only made things worse. I didn't know how long I sat there before I realized the sun had shifted. The heat had gone from warm to almost unbearable. The air had a thick quality to it, as though I had entered a different dimension, a parallel version of the world I had just left. And yet, when I checked the clock, it hadn't moved. 7:42 a.m. It wasn't until that evening that I understood what had happened, or what was happening, rather. I went through the motions of the rest of the day as if nothing had changed. I went to work, interacted with colleagues, did everything I usually did. But something was always off. Something was watching me, or at least that's how it felt. My mind was constantly buzzing with that feeling of déjà vu, as though the world had already happened and I was just playing catch-up. That night, I went to bed, hoping to escape the feeling, only to wake up once again to the same 7:42 a.m. It was the same as it had been. I was caught in a loop, a moment that never seemed to end. I tried to fight it. I tried everything. I ran out of my apartment, jumped into my car, sped down every road I could find, and yet, every time, I would come across that man. The same man, standing at the side of the road. His hand raised, his eyes desperate. And then it hit me. He wasn't trying to flag me down. He was warning me. But I couldn't escape. No matter what I did, the moment I tried to break free, the world would reset. The same road, the same man, the same time. I could hear his voice in my head, the whisper of a warning. And yet I couldn't reach him, couldn't understand him fully. The world would not let me. I had spent what felt like hours, or maybe it was days, I had lost all sense of time, driving through the same roads, running from the same truth. The man was always there, standing at the side of the road. And every time I tried to escape him, to make a choice that would break the cycle, I ended up right back at the same place. I couldn't outrun it. I began to notice things about the world around me, things I had never paid attention to before. Little details, small inconsistencies that told me something was wrong. The trees on the side of the road, their branches had an unnatural bend, as if they'd been growing in the same direction for too long. The streetlights, too bright, too sharp, their halos flickering in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I wasn't just trapped in a loop, I was trapped in a world that had been molded around me, tailored to my every mistake. I didn't understand what it was, or how it worked. But I knew it had a purpose. And I was starting to think that I was the one who was out of place. I stopped trying to make sense of it. There was no point. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth, there was no escape. The rules of this world had been rewritten in a way that didn't make any sense. I didn't understand why I kept dying and waking up again, or why the man kept appearing. But I knew one thing, this wasn't random. Someone, or something, was in control of it all. That thought made my skin crawl. It started with whispers. At first, they were faint. So quiet that I thought they were just my mind playing tricks. The soft murmurs at the back of my thoughts, as if someone was speaking to me from far away. But then they grew louder. The words became clearer. You have to stop. You can't run from it. You're already dead. I tried to ignore them, tried to push them out of my mind, but they kept coming, relentless and unyielding. Sometimes, I would hear them from the shadows, sometimes they would whisper in my ears when I was alone. Other times, they came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, everywhere. It was maddening. And that's when I realized, I wasn't alone. I wasn't just trapped in some endless cycle. I was being watched, not by the man on the road, but by something else. Something far older and far more powerful. The voices were coming from places that shouldn't have been possible. They seemed to wrap around me, becoming a constant presence in my life, seeping into every moment, into every thought. I tried to scream, but my voice got swallowed by the darkness. I couldn't break free from the grip they had on me. And they weren't just whispers anymore. They began to speak directly to me, as though they knew everything about me. You think you're the only one trapped here, one voice said. It was cold and distant, like it was coming from an abyss. You're not. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could only listen. There are others. And we are all stuck in the same place, just like you. I had no idea how much time had passed since I first realized the cycle. Days? Weeks? Maybe longer. I felt like I was losing track of everything. My sense of self was fraying. It was hard to tell whether I was still me, or if I had become some kind of ghost, wandering through a world that wasn't mine. The man was always there. I tried to approach him. I tried to ask him what was happening, what I needed to do to stop it, but every time I did, he would just stand there, staring at me. His face was always the same, hollow, expressionless. It was like looking at a reflection of myself, except there was no warmth, no emotion. Just an empty shell. And then, one day, as I drove past him yet again, something happened that shook me to my core. The man spoke. Not in a way that was audible, not in the sense that a voice would sound if you were standing in front of someone. No, this was more like a thought, a sudden, invasive feeling that filled my mind, overwhelming everything else. You can never leave. I slammed my foot on the brakes, sending the car skidding to a stop. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in shallow gasps. I looked around, desperate for something, anything, that would explain this. But the man was still there, standing motionless at the side of the road. No. No, this couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming, I had to be hallucinating. It was the only logical explanation. But deep down, a voice inside me knew it wasn't. I was being held. Trapped. Not by some supernatural force, not by some godlike entity, but by something far more sinister. The next time I found myself in that loop, I was determined to understand what was happening. I wasn't going to wait for some miracle. I wasn't going to let the voices keep me in this madness. I drove as fast as I could, passing through streets I'd driven 1,000 times before. Each turn felt more familiar, more suffocating. Every house, every building, every sign, they all felt like they were watching me. I could feel their eyes, their unblinking, judgmental stare. And yet, no matter how far I drove, I always ended up in the same place, the road, the man, the light. It wasn't until I stopped trying to fight it that I saw the truth. The road wasn't real. The man wasn't real. This whole world was constructed, tailored just for me. But there was something more, the people, the whispers, the others, they weren't just figments of my imagination. They were part of the cycle, too. I wasn't just a participant. I was the cause. It was then that I understood what I had to do. The loop wasn't an accident. It wasn't some cosmic joke. It was a test. A test that I had failed every time. I had to break the cycle, but I had no idea how. Each time I tried, I only ended up right back at the beginning. But maybe the answer wasn't in breaking it. Maybe the answer was in accepting it. Could I really live like this forever? Could I accept the fact that I was never meant to escape? I don't know if I had any choice. But I had to try. I don't know how long it's been. Days? Weeks? Months? Time feels irrelevant now. I've stopped looking at the clock, at the calendar, because each tick, each passing second, feels like the same moment stretched into infinity. It's as if time has been warped here, reduced to a loop that I can't break. I used to believe that everything had a purpose. That every moment I lived, every choice I made, was a small thread in the larger tapestry of life. But now, I realize, I'm not part of the tapestry. I am the thread that keeps unraveling, weaving its way back into the same, cruel pattern over and over again. It's a curse I can't escape. And the most terrifying part is, I'm not even sure I want to anymore. The voices came again, but this time, they were different. They weren't just whispers anymore, they were distinct voices, overlapping one another, speaking in fragmented sentences that didn't make sense. It felt like I was hearing the thoughts of people who were trapped here with me. I could hear their fear. Their confusion. I'm not supposed to be here. Please, help me. I need to get out. Why won't you let me go? Their voices had an urgency that matched my own growing panic. But there was something about them that didn't sit right. Something off. Like they weren't truly people, more like echoes of people. As if their memories had become tainted, corrupted by whatever force was keeping us here. At first, I thought I was going insane. After all, these voices, these broken pleas, came from nowhere. They weren't coming from any physical source. It was like I was hearing the thoughts of people who had been erased from existence, but their consciousness had somehow managed to hang on. They were stuck, just like me. But I wasn't alone. I never had been. One day, or perhaps it was just another loop, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A flicker at the edge of my vision, like a shadow that didn't belong. I looked out the window as I drove, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw another car. Not behind me, not in front of me, but alongside me, driving at the same speed. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't think much of it at first. The world around me had become so strange, so surreal, that the idea of another car on the road seemed almost normal. But as the days passed, I kept seeing it. The same flicker. The same shadow. Always just on the edge of my vision. I couldn't catch a glimpse of the driver. I couldn't make out any distinguishing details. But I knew something was there. Something otherworldly. It was like a ghost, a reflection of a world that shouldn't exist. And it haunted me. What was it? Who was it? And why did it never come closer? Was it trying to warn me too? Or was it just another piece of the puzzle, another part of the loop? The tension kept building. The weight of it was crushing. Every decision I made, every choice I thought I could control, led me back to the same place, the man, the road, the cycle. I tried everything. I tried to go back to my apartment, to leave, to change my surroundings. But no matter where I went, I always found myself back in the car, back on the same road, back to the same 7:42 a.m. I felt myself losing my grip on reality. The voices, the shadows, the flickering glimpses of the phantom car, everything had become a blur, a web of paranoia and dread. And the more I tried to escape, the more lost I became. I began to doubt everything. Was I the one creating all of this? Was I the one who had trapped myself here? Or was there something, someone, manipulating the world, pulling the strings, playing with me like I was a puppet in a twisted game? At night, when I finally lay in bed, I felt the pressure building in my chest, suffocating me, dragging me down into a place I couldn't escape. My thoughts were no longer mine, they were theirs. You're not the only one. You're just a part of the experiment. You're a failure. The words echoed in my mind, repeated by countless voices, all speaking at once, all trying to drown me in their collective despair. I was drowning. And yet, I could not break free. It wasn't until I found the journal that I realized the truth. It was hidden in the glove compartment of the car, a small leather-bound book with no name, no markings. The first time I opened it, I didn't know what to expect. I thought it might be some kind of warning, a clue, a map to guide me out. But when I flipped open the pages, I froze. The journal was mine. Every page was filled with entries that were too familiar, too detailed. The handwriting was mine, but the thoughts were not my own. They were observations. Observations about myself. About my actions. About the choices I made. And that's when it hit me. The world I was living in wasn't just a loop. It was measuring me. Tracking my every move, recording my every mistake. Every thought I had, every doubt, every fleeting emotion, it was all being watched, recorded, and stored. This wasn't a glitch in reality. It wasn't some cosmic mistake. I was the subject. I was part of an experiment I hadn't consented to, an experiment I couldn't escape from. The journal ended with one final sentence. You can break the cycle, but not without making a sacrifice. I don't know what that means. But I have to know. I have to figure out what this sacrifice is, because if I don't, I'll be stuck here forever. There's no other way out. And yet, something in me is scared. What if breaking the cycle means losing everything? What if the sacrifice I have to make is me? What if the version of me that gets to leave isn't me at all? I don't know if I have the courage to find out. But I have to try. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The last sentence in the journal, you can break the cycle, but not without making a sacrifice. What could it mean? What kind of sacrifice was it talking about? Would it be something as simple as giving up my life? Or was there more to it, something darker? I sat in the car, staring at the journal, the words burned into my mind. The road outside my window was empty, the world strangely still. There was no sound except for the low hum of the engine, the faint ticking of the clock on the dashboard. 7:42 a.m. The repetition was maddening. I slammed my fist on the wheel, the sound echoing through the empty car. I had tried everything. I had begged for answers, pleaded with the voices in my head, tried to escape every version of this nightmare. But no matter what I did, I always ended up back at the same place. Trapped. And now I had to make a choice. What was I willing to lose to break free? I don't know when I first saw it, but I remember the chill it sent down my spine when I did. The man. The one who had been standing at the side of the road, who had always waved at me. But now, he wasn't the same. He was me. Or, at least, a version of me. It was as if I was looking at my reflection, but somehow, something was off. His face was pale, too still, his eyes dark, hollow. It was as if he was a shadow of who I once was, a twisted doppelganger that existed to haunt me. He stared at me with no expression, just an empty gaze that made my skin crawl. And the moment I saw him, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a reflection of everything I had become. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaking, and approached him cautiously. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even acknowledge me. He just stood there, silently, waiting for me to make the first move. I reached out to touch him, but as my hand came closer, he disappeared. A flicker of light, and then he was gone, vanished, like smoke in the wind. I stood there, staring at the spot where he had been, my mind spinning. What was this? Who was that version of me? And why did it feel like I had seen him before, like he was a part of me that I didn't recognize anymore? The more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth. The experiment wasn't just about time or reality. It wasn't about the loop itself. The experiment was about me, my mind, my consciousness, my very essence. I started to feel like a lab rat. A subject being tested and manipulated, but without any way to understand the rules of the game. I had been trapped in this endless cycle because they wanted to see what would happen. What would happen to a mind when it was pushed to the edge of its limits, when it was forced to relive the same moment over and over again, but with no understanding of why. But now, I realized that the true test wasn't whether I could escape. It was whether I could keep my sanity long enough to make the choice that would end it all. The voices had grown more insistent, more urgent. They were louder now, filling my head with frenzied thoughts. They no longer spoke to me in fragments, they were full sentences, commands, demands. And this time, they weren't just warnings. They were pleas. You have to leave. Do it now. If you don't make the sacrifice, it will never end. We can't keep doing this. But what did they mean? What was the sacrifice? I felt like I was losing my grip on everything. The edges of reality were fraying, like a fabric unraveling under my fingers. I couldn't tell if the world around me was real anymore or if I had become a part of some twisted hallucination. But one thing was clear, the decision was mine to make. I had to face it. Was the sacrifice the loss of my own life? Was I meant to kill myself to break the cycle? Or was there something else? Something more disturbing? Maybe it wasn't about dying, maybe the sacrifice was something far worse, losing myself entirely. The voices whispered again, louder now. More desperate. You have to choose. If you don't, we'll all stay here. Forever. I closed my eyes, trying to block them out, but they kept coming, the pressure in my chest mounting. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. And then, I realized the truth. The cycle wasn't just about time. It was about identity. About memory. About consciousness. I wasn't just dying over and over. I was losing myself. I had become part of the experiment, and the real sacrifice wasn't death. The real sacrifice was my identity. My sense of self. If I wanted to end the cycle, I had to give up the last part of me that still clung to the world I once knew. The me that was still holding on to memories, to desires, to hope. The sun set, but the night didn't come. There was no passing of time, no breaking of the day. It was all suspended in an endless twilight. The world outside my window was still, like a painting, frozen, lifeless. I stood in front of the car, my breath shallow, my chest tight. I wasn't sure if I was ready to make the choice. Was there any choice? And then, the man appeared again. But this time, it wasn't the version of me I had seen earlier. This time, it was the real man, the one who had been trying to warn me all along. He didn't wave. He didn't look at me with desperation. He simply stood there, silent, waiting. For me. The air around me felt thick, heavy, suffocating. But I knew I had to face him. I had to ask him what the sacrifice was. I took a step forward. And another. And another. The moment I reached him, I realized the truth. I wasn't just part of the experiment. I was the key to it. I had been chosen for this, whether I wanted it or not. And the only way to break the cycle, was to give up everything. To erase myself from existence. The choice was clear. I had to choose whether to live or to let the cycle end by erasing every trace of who I was. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like hours. The man stood there, his face unreadable, his eyes hollow as if he were a reflection of myself, a version of me that had been forgotten. I could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on me, heavier than any physical force. Every breath I took felt like a battle. I wanted to scream, to break free from this never-ending nightmare. But I knew the truth now. There was no escaping it. This wasn't just about survival, this was about becoming nothing. The man didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched me, as though he were waiting for me to come to terms with what was happening. His silence was deafening, a constant reminder that I wasn't in control anymore. I stepped closer, my feet moving with a will of their own. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled me toward him, as if he were the key to everything. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to lose myself. But there was no time left. The voices in my head, once whispers, had become a cacophony of desperate cries. They were no longer begging me to escape. Now, they were pleading for me to stop, to make the sacrifice and end the endless loop. You have to let go. You are nothing without it. If you don't, we'll be trapped here forever. I covered my ears, trying to block them out, but they were inside me now, seeping into my very thoughts. I could feel their cold fingers grasping at my consciousness, pulling me toward the darkness. The longer I resisted, the louder they became. It was as if they were feeding on my fear, growing stronger with each passing second. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, constricting with the weight of the decision that hung over me like a guillotine blade. Every part of me screamed to turn away, to reject what was happening, but I knew better now. This wasn't a choice between life and death. It wasn't that simple. This was about identity. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I had already lost myself. I had spent so long clinging to the hope that I could escape, that I could return to the life I had once known, that I hadn't stopped to consider what had already been taken from me. I wasn't the person I used to be. I had become something else. A shadow. A husk. A version of me that didn't belong. And now, standing in front of the man, the embodiment of the choice I had to make, I saw it clearly. There was no me anymore. Not really. The sacrifice wasn't about dying. It was about losing everything I had ever been. The memories. The emotions. The connections. All of it would be erased. I would be erased. And that's when I realized the horror of it all. I wasn't just trapped in a loop. I was being forgotten. A little piece of me would disappear each time I died, and when the cycle finally ended, there would be nothing left of me. Not even a memory. I stood there, facing the man, my hand trembling at my side. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his eyes burned with a knowing gaze. He knew what I had to do. And yet, he offered no guidance, no answers. I felt like I was drowning in an ocean of uncertainty. My thoughts were racing, my heart pounding in my chest. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape, to try one more time to break the cycle. But I knew the truth, I couldn't run anymore. The road had come to an end. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. My mind was a battlefield, torn between the urge to live, to hold on to whatever shred of myself remained, and the cold realization that to escape this nightmare, I had to sacrifice it all. And then, the decision hit me. It wasn't a choice between living or dying. It was a choice between being someone or being nothing. I had to make the ultimate sacrifice. I had to let go of who I was, who I had become, in order to break free from this endless nightmare. It was the only way. I stepped forward, slowly, as if my body didn't belong to me anymore. My legs were weak, my feet dragging against the gravel of the road. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge my approach. He just stood there, waiting, like the final step in the process. I raised my hand, trembling, as if I were about to touch something sacred, something untouchable. But then I stopped. Was this it? Was this how it ended? For a moment, I hesitated. I could still feel the remnants of who I was, the last traces of my memories, the echo of my past life. I could still hear the voices of those I had loved, the laughter of friends, the warmth of home. Was it worth it? Was I ready to let go? The man's eyes met mine, and in that instant, something shifted. I saw it. I understood. He wasn't me. He wasn't a version of me. He was what I would become, the hollow shell of who I had once been. I reached out, placing my hand on his shoulder, and in that moment, everything stopped. The world around me froze. The wind stopped. The hum of the universe ceased. And then, the darkness took over. I woke up. Or at least, I thought I did. The world was dark. Completely, utterly dark. There were no roads, no cars, no people. No man standing at the side of the road. Just, silence. I couldn't hear my breath. I couldn't feel my body. It was as if I had ceased to exist. But I wasn't afraid anymore. There was no fear in the void. There was nothing. No time. No memory. No self. I had made the sacrifice. I had let go of everything, and now, there was nothing left to hold on to. But as the silence stretched on, I realized something. I wasn't truly gone. I was still here. Somewhere. A thought flickered in the void. It was distant, faint, but undeniable. It's not over. The void stretched on, endless, infinite. And yet, somewhere in the darkness, a faint light flickered, distant, beckoning me forward. And with that light, I felt the familiar pull. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if I was supposed to return. But I knew this for certain. The cycle was starting again. I don't know how long I've been here. The light in the distance flickered like a faint memory, barely perceptible but present, pulling me towards it. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to feel anything anymore. But something inside me, that last shred of something human, drove me forward. I didn't know what to expect. Was it the end? Or was I walking into another version of the cycle, another layer of this nightmare? Maybe this was all part of the plan. The cycle had never truly stopped, had it? The voices had gone silent, but their absence only made the air heavier, more oppressive. The darkness around me wasn't just a void. It was suffocating, like it was trying to consume me. The emptiness pressed against my skin, my chest, my very soul. I was being erased. But I couldn't turn away from the light. I reached forward, my fingers trembling, my body shaking with exhaustion, both physical and mental. My hand reached for it, hoping, no, desperately praying, that this time, it would be different. And then, the light engulfed me. I woke up again. But this time, everything was wrong. It wasn't like before. It wasn't the same road, the same empty town, or the same loop. The world felt distorted, twisted, like a badly frayed rope being pulled apart. But as I approached, something shifted in the air. The world around me melted. The buildings warped, the ground beneath my feet trembled. It wasn't an earthquake, it was the very fabric of reality itself bending, tearing apart at the seams. I was no longer in the same world. The man didn't move. He didn't speak. But his gaze followed me as I walked closer, and it felt different. I felt sick, like something deep inside me was being twisted, unmoored. I reached out to touch his shoulder, the very same movement I had made in the previous loop. But the moment my fingers brushed against his skin, everything stopped. The world froze again, but this time, it didn't feel like I was in control. No, it felt like something else had control of me. I wasn't alone. The voices, those whispers that had once taunted me, that had filled my head with maddening urgency, returned. But this time, they weren't just whispers. They were louder, clearer. They were my thoughts, but not my own. You are the key, but you've forgotten what it means to be human. You will never escape the darkness. You're part of it now. The sacrifice wasn't enough. You'll always be here. You'll always remember. I could hear the distorted, broken fragments of their voices twisting together into a single, unified cry. The sound was deafening. It rattled my bones, shaking me to my core. I was drowning in it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The whispers became roars, a cacophony of voices that surrounded me, drowning out everything else. But through it all, I saw the man's face again. This time, it wasn't just a reflection. This time, it was me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The man wasn't a separate entity. He wasn't an external force. He was me. I wasn't trapped in a loop. I was the loop. Every time I died, every time I made the same choice, I was becoming something else. The man standing in front of me wasn't a warning. He was the future. A future that I had created. I understood it now. All this time, I had thought I was trying to escape, trying to break free from the cycle. But the cycle wasn't something I was trapped in, it was something I had built. Every decision I had made, every path I had taken, had led me to this moment. The sacrifice wasn't about death. It was about identity. Memory. Self. And now, the man standing in front of me, he was the end of it all. The man I had become. The person I would always be. I wasn't going to wake up. I wasn't going to find another world, another timeline. There was nothing left to save. I was a ghost in my own mind. The real choice, the one I had been avoiding all this time, was the hardest. Could I let go of myself completely? Could I erase every part of me and allow the cycle to end? Or would I continue this madness, locked in an eternal loop, forever remembering my own failure to escape? I could feel it now. The darkness that had been whispering in my ear. The darkness that had been my reality all along. It wasn't just the world. It was me. I was the loop. The man stepped closer to me, his face still a hollow mask, and for the first time, he opened his mouth. His voice was my voice, but not my own. It was the voice of someone who had lived through too many deaths. Too many cycles. You know what you must do. And with that, I stepped forward. I took one last breath, and I closed my eyes. The darkness surrounded me, and as I let go of everything I had ever been, the world began to fade away. And then, there was nothing. I woke up again, but this time there was no disorientation. No confusion. I was aware. The fog in my mind had lifted, not all at once, but steadily, as if the walls of the prison I had been living in were slowly dissolving. For the first time, I felt like I had control over my own thoughts, my own actions. But the emptiness around me, the void, was still there. I stood up, feeling the air around me, the oppressive silence. My chest tightened. The stillness of it all was suffocating. But this time, I didn't feel panic. I felt curiosity. The last time I had been in the void, I had been desperate to escape, to break the cycle, to make sense of it all. But now, I had a new awareness, a new understanding. The cycle wasn't just a random twist of fate. It was created, designed. And I had been the subject. I had been manipulated from the start. As I looked around the void, something shifted. Fragments of the past began to emerge, like broken shards of a forgotten memory. The road. The car. The street signs I had driven past 1,000 times. But this time, the pieces weren't distorted. They were clear. Solid. I walked forward, my feet moving without hesitation. I was in control. The world around me flickered like a broken screen. One moment, I was in the car, driving down the same familiar stretch of road. The next, I was standing on the edge of a street that felt vaguely familiar, but completely wrong. The buildings were all wrong. The sky above me was darker than it should be, and the air felt stale, like it had been locked in place for too long. I wasn't just reliving memories anymore. I was experiencing multiple realities, each one a variation of the world I had lived in. Each one connected to the last. I could feel something pulling at the edges of my mind, as if the world itself was trying to pull me back into the cycle. But I resisted. I wasn't going back. I was going forward. I needed answers. I needed to understand. The more I walked through the shifting, distorted world, the more the fragments began to make sense. They weren't just memories. They were clues, pieces of a puzzle that I had been too blinded to see before. The man I had seen by the road. The accidents. The repetitions. The feeling of being watched. The endless cycle of life and death. I felt the pull again. Not physical, no, it was a mental tug, a sensation that something was lurking just out of sight, just beyond my reach. The shadows. I could feel them again. The whispers. They had been silent for so long, but now, they returned with a different urgency. You know. The voice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. I recognized it as my own voice, but it was distorted. Twisted. You know what you are. I stopped. What did they mean? What was I supposed to be? The shadows grew closer, swirling around me. They weren't physical entities. They weren't alive. They were memories, residual energy left over from the system I was trapped in. They were the echoes of the cycle, waiting for me to remember who I really was. What I had become. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched one of the shifting fragments of the world around me. The image wavered, like a mirage, before becoming solid. The world around me collapsed, and I was suddenly back in a room. It wasn't a room I recognized, but there was something about it that felt familiar. I looked around. The walls were covered with strange symbols. The air was thick with the scent of metal and old paper. This was no ordinary room. It was a place designed to study, to observe, and it was designed to trap. I stepped forward, my footfall echoing on the floor. A table sat in the center, covered with papers and strange devices. I felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. The last time I had been here, I hadn't realized what it was. I hadn't understood. But now I could feel the purpose behind it all. The system, the experiment. I was inside it. This is where it started, I muttered to myself. A voice rang out, but this time it wasn't the whispering shadows. It was louder. Clearer. Welcome. The voice was distorted, mechanical. Controlled. I turned toward it, and saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, hidden in shadow. As they stepped forward, I felt a sudden sense of recognition. The figure's face was hidden, but their presence, their aura felt so familiar. I couldn't place it. You've come far, but you still don't understand. The voice was calm, almost amused. Who are you? I asked. My voice was firm, but my heart was racing. The figure didn't speak at first. Instead, they stepped into the light, revealing themselves in full. And that's when I saw it. The face. It was mine. The figure, my doppelganger, stepped closer. The world around me grew hazy, like the edges of my vision were being smudged. What is this? What's going on? I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't answer right away. It just stood there, watching me, as if waiting for something. Finally, it spoke. You still don't understand, do you? The voice was mine, but colder. Distorted. I stepped back, my thoughts spinning. I wanted to ask everything. But the questions were coming too fast. You are the key, you always have been. The figure continued. You've been part of this experiment since the beginning. And now, you have a choice to make. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just about survival. This was about identity. About memory. Who I was. What I had become. The figure before me, myself, spoke again. You've already died. Every time. Every loop. And you've been reborn again. I felt a chill run through me. But each time, a little more of you fades. The memories. The emotions. The humanity. The figure's voice softened, almost sympathetic. And now, you're at the end of the line. The last thread. What do you mean? I demanded. My voice was shaking now, but I fought to stay calm. Why have I been trapped here? The figure stepped forward, closing the distance between us. You were never meant to be saved. You were never meant to escape. You're a part of this. A part of the system. The room began to pulse, as if the air itself was alive. The very walls seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding, closing in on me. The figure continued, its voice becoming more intense. It's too late now. The system was built for you. And for others like you. The figure's expression shifted, as if it were looking through me. But you have been the most successful. The one who has lasted the longest. I could feel the world around me vibrating, shaking with tension. The realization was hitting me hard now, the system wasn't just a test. It wasn't just a cruel experiment. I was part of it. I was the experiment. I could feel it now. The core of the system. The figure, my doppelganger, stepped back, as if giving me space. It didn't speak for a moment, allowing the tension to build. Then it said, simply, the system will reset. No matter what. It always does. I felt the pressure building. The walls around me pulsed like they were alive, like the room itself was breathing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The core of the system was here, hidden beneath the layers of distorted reality, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The figure, my own twisted reflection, stood before me, silent and still, like a shadow. The realization hit me harder than before. The system wasn't just a prison. It was a machine, a construct built around my existence. It had been designed to control every aspect of my life, my death, and my resurrection. Every loop, every moment of suffering I had endured, had been part of its design. The walls flickered again, revealing what lay underneath: gears, wires, and pulsing energy. The walls were metaphysical, yes, but they were also physical. They were real, just as real as the things that had once seemed so ordinary in my life: the streets, the cars, the man. I was surrounded by a machine of my own making. "You've always been a part of this," the figure spoke again, its voice now deeper, more mechanical. "You can feel it, can't you? The system you're inside of, it's connected to you. Every death, every resurrection, you've caused it all. And now you have the power to stop it. To end it. But it will come with a cost." The figure's words echoed in my head. A cost. It was always about a cost, wasn't it? But what kind of cost? Was it my life? My memory? My identity? I clenched my fists. I had been manipulated, but I wasn't going to be controlled anymore. The realization settled in, as if something was awakening inside me. A small spark of defiance. "No," I whispered, as if speaking to myself. "This is my mind. My life." The figure didn't respond. It didn't need to. It was waiting for me to come to terms with the truth. The system was my creation, just as I had created it for myself, but I had never fully understood that until now. I had to stop being the architect of my own prison. I closed my eyes, focusing on the pulsating energy around me. I could feel the threads, the strings that had once controlled me, running through the walls, running through the ground beneath my feet. I reached out, but not physically. I reached with my mind. I could feel the fractures, small, but significant cracks in the system. It was a delicate web, but it was fraying. The more I focused, the more I understood. The system wasn't infallible. It had been designed to contain me, but there were imperfections, weak points. There was a way out. If I could tear at those cracks, I could weaken it. But the cost would be high. I would have to let go of everything I knew, everything I had become. It would be like undoing the very fabric of my identity. I felt a cold sweat forming on my brow. The power was in my hands, but at what cost? As I stood there, contemplating my next move, something began to shift. The shadows surrounding me thickened, twisting in a way that felt unnatural. I was no longer alone. The others were here. I could feel them. "You know you can't escape," one of the voices whispered. It was soft, almost comforting, but it carried an underlying threat. "We are a part of you. And you are a part of us." I didn't want to listen. I refused to listen. But it wasn't just the voices in my head anymore. The room itself seemed to close in on me, its walls pulsating with the same oppressive force that had held me in place for so long. I could feel the system's grip tightening around me. It was like it had recognized my resistance and was retaliating. The more I pushed back, the harder the world pressed against me. I reached out, tearing at the edges of the world I had been trapped in. But the more I pulled, the more the walls closed in. The figure stood there, unmoving, watching me. Waiting for me to make the final decision. It was then that I realized the full truth. The system wasn't just an experiment. It was a mirror. A mirror of myself. It had been crafted to reflect every doubt, every fear, every weakness. The voice in my head, the one that whispered to me, trying to convince me to stay, to accept the loop, to accept my role as the experiment, wasn't just the system. It was me. A reflection of my own deepest insecurities, my need to control. And then, I understood. I was the one holding myself captive. The system had been designed to break me down, to force me to confront my own weaknesses, my own doubts. But it had underestimated me. It hadn't accounted for the fact that I would see through it. I had awakened. I had the power to break it. To tear it apart. I stood still, focusing. The cracks were still there, barely visible, but I could see them now. I reached out again, and this time, I pulled. At first, nothing happened. But then, a faint tremor ran through the room. The walls shuddered, and the figure flinched. It wasn't strong. It wasn't enough to bring the system down yet, but it was a start. I could feel the strain of the system as it pushed back against me. It was fighting me, trying to keep me contained. The power was in me, but I had to be careful. I had to be deliberate. The more I focused on the fractures, the more I felt the system's resistance. But I was breaking through. I could feel it. I was fighting back. And then, a new voice pierced the silence. It wasn't the figure, and it wasn't the shadows. It was familiar, but I hadn't heard it in what felt like an eternity. You're not alone in this. The voice was calm, almost reassuring. I turned, and there, in the distance, I saw him again, the man. The one who had always appeared on the road, standing there with that haunted expression. You've been a part of the system, yes. But so have I. The words didn't make sense at first, but then I understood. The man wasn't just a figment of the system. He was another version of me, a reflection. Like me, he had been trapped in this cycle, unable to break free. But now, he was here. He was part of the breaking. Together, we can end it. He said, his voice strong, unwavering. It took me a moment to process it. But when I did, I understood. The man wasn't an enemy. He wasn't trying to trap me. He was me, just as much as I was him. We were connected by the same system, the same cycle. And together, we had the power to shatter it. I stepped forward, extending my hand. He took it without hesitation. The moment our fingers touched, I felt a surge of energy, a crack in the system's foundation. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. We had to push harder. The figure, the puppet master, screamed, its distorted voice filling the room. The walls around us began to break apart, the system collapsing in on itself. But the closer we got to the core, the more the resistance grew. We were running out of time. The system was dying, but it would take us with it if we didn't finish this. I clenched my teeth, determined. We can do this. And we did. Together, we ripped through the final layers of the system, breaking the core apart. The world shattered. The cycle was broken. Everything collapsed around us. The walls disintegrated into nothing, the shadows vanished, and the figure, it was gone. I took a deep breath, the air fresh, real. I had done it. But the journey was far from over. The real world awaited, and now I had to rebuild. Rebuild myself. The world around me was crumbling. No longer were the walls pulsing with energy, instead, they were splitting apart, as if the very fabric of my existence was being shredded. The system, the prison that had trapped me for so long, was finally falling apart, but something else was emerging from the chaos. I wasn't just watching the world collapse. I was feeling it. Each crack in the walls of reality felt like it was tearing a part of me away. The air around me crackled with static. My mind trembled as the remnants of the cycle I had been caught in began to fade away. But I wasn't ready to be free. Not yet. Not fully. The system was disintegrating, but its grip still lingered, gnawing at me, whispering doubts and insecurities I had long buried. The voice was so familiar, like a distant echo that refused to leave. You think you've won? I spun around, my chest tightening. The voice wasn't mine, but it was my fear, my self-doubt. You can't escape who you really are. It was the voice of the system itself, mocking me, taunting me with the truth I didn't want to hear. You'll always be the subject. Always trapped. I turned away from the crumbling reality around me and faced the man, the version of me that had stood by the road, the version I had grown into. But now, standing before me, he didn't seem like a reflection. He wasn't just part of the system. He was a part of me, something I had been too blind to recognize before. He had been there through every iteration, every reset. You're part of the system. I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. The man, my reflection, nodded slowly, his face as unreadable as ever. But I saw something in his eyes now. Something I hadn't seen before. I know. His voice was steady, but I could hear the trace of something darker beneath the surface. I've always been part of it. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. The realization was hitting me harder than before. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you warn me? My voice cracked, the frustration rising. He looked at me for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter, more resigned. You wouldn't have believed me. He said, almost sorrowfully. You had to learn the truth on your own. It wasn't enough. The words weren't enough. I could feel my frustration rising. I had been living in the dark, not knowing who I really was, or what I had become. But now, I understood. I had been trapped in the system, just like him. Just like the man I had been fighting. I stepped back, taking a breath. The man, the reflection of me, wasn't just a mirror. He wasn't a mere figure in the shadows. He was a manifestation of my self-doubt, my insecurities. He had been the part of me that had always wanted to believe I was trapped, that I had no choice but to exist in the loop. But the more I looked at him, the more I realized, he wasn't me. He was the part of me I had failed to confront. And I had to let him go. I wasn't just breaking free from the system. I was breaking free from myself. The reality around me continued to fracture, but I knew now that the true fight wasn't against the system. It was against the version of me that was still clinging to the cycle. The world felt like it was pulling me apart, and the man, the reflection of my past self, was still standing there, silently watching, waiting for me to make the final decision. Was I strong enough to face myself? I stepped toward him again. My mind was clearer now, but the uncertainty lingered. I reached out, not in anger, but in understanding. I had to let go of the fear, the self-doubt. The fear that I would never escape. And as I reached toward him, he did something unexpected. He smiled. You're ready. He whispered. You're ready to face the truth. With a final breath, I stepped forward and, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I let go. And I watched as the version of me that had haunted me faded away, disappearing into the fragments of the system that had created us both. With that final piece of myself gone, the world around me began to disintegrate more quickly. The walls crumbled faster. The shadows twisted, their form becoming less defined. The system, no longer able to hold its shape, began to collapse. The shifting landscape around me continued to pulse, the cracks spreading outwards like a spider's web. But now, there was something different. The energy around me felt more alive. It was no longer a system, a machine of control. It was something else. Something real. I didn't know how much time I had left. But I knew that this was it, the final test, the final moment. I didn't have much time left. The walls of the system were breaking apart, but with each passing moment, the energy inside me, the energy I had fought so hard to reclaim, was growing stronger. I felt like I was becoming the system, but now, I controlled it. Not as a prisoner, but as its architect. I reached out again, and this time, I wasn't just fighting for freedom. I was fighting to control the narrative. The system had been built on fear, on control, on the idea that I couldn't escape. But now, I had the power to rewrite it. The shadows swirled, the voices of my doubts fading into nothingness as I tore through the fabric of the system. I was no longer a subject. I was the creator. I stepped into the core, my body glowing with the power I had reclaimed. The system trembled. And then, it stopped. The world around me disappeared. The collapse was over. The cycle had ended. The shadows, the figure, the system, they were gone. I opened my eyes. I wasn't in the void anymore. I wasn't in the simulation. The air was fresh, real, like it had substance. I could feel it. The warmth of the sun, the cool breeze on my skin. I was free. But as I took in the world around me, I realized something deeper. I wasn't just free from the system. I was free from myself, from the self-doubt, the fears that had held me captive for so long. I was no longer part of the cycle. I was reborn. The journey wasn't over. The world I had stepped into wasn't perfect. But it was real. It was mine to shape. No longer would I be the subject in an experiment. No longer would I be the victim of the system. I looked around, a sense of peace settling within me. I was free. And with that freedom, I knew I could finally start anew. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I felt the weight lift. The chains were broken. I was ready to begin my new life. I woke up in a place I didn't recognize. But it felt real, more real than any world I had ever known. The air smelled like fresh grass and dew, the morning sun filtered through trees I could almost touch. It was peaceful. Quiet. But something gnawed at me. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was deafening. I sat up in the grass, taking in my surroundings. There was no trace of the system here. No walls, no manipulations. I was free. The weight in my chest felt lighter than it had in a long time. But the question lingered, who was I now? As I walked through the field, the memories came in fragments. The cycles. The man. The shadows. They were still with me, lingering like echoes. But they were faint, distant. The memories felt hollow, not like my own, but like I had borrowed them. Like they were part of a story I no longer belonged to. I didn't know how long it would take to fully forget. Would I forget everything? The endless cycles? Or would they always be a part of me, woven into the fabric of who I had become? The sky overhead seemed endless, a deep blue stretching into infinity. And in that infinity, I felt small. But I was alive. I had made it out. And now, I had to make sense of this new existence. At first, it felt like a dream. Walking through a world where no one knew me. No one was watching. No one was pulling the strings. It was freedom. But freedom didn't come with a manual. I had no plan. No purpose. Everything I had known, everything that had once defined me, felt like it was falling apart. I could remember the road, the accidents, the man, but I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Was I the same person I had been before? I had no answers, and no one to ask. I walked through the world, trying to find my place. But with every step, the feeling of being lost gnawed at me. I had escaped, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do next. Days passed. Or was it weeks? Time had lost its meaning. The world outside felt endless, but it was also empty. Something was missing. Something that I couldn't put my finger on. The shadows, those whispers that had followed me for so long, returned. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. The presence. It was no longer a voice in my head, but a sensation, like being watched. Always watched. You can never escape. The voice whispered. I froze. My heart pounded. I had thought I was free. I had broken the cycle. But the more I listened, the more I felt it, the connection wasn't severed. It wasn't just a loop. The system hadn't been destroyed. It had been rewritten. As the days went by, I began to feel the weight of my own existence. The past wasn't gone. It wasn't erased. The memories still had power over me, pulling me back. I could feel them tugging at my mind, even when I tried to ignore them. The question burned inside me, was I truly free? The more I thought about it, the more I realized, the system had never been about the world. It wasn't about the road or the man. It was about me. I had always been the source of the cycle. The system didn't create me. I created it. I had been programmed to break, to fall, and to rise again. But what happened when I could no longer feel the cycle's pull? What happened when I was cut off from the source of my existence? I had escaped, yes. But now I was confronted with the most terrifying thought of all. What if I was still part of it? The figure appeared again, this time not as a shadow, but in the flesh. The man I had seen standing at the side of the road. His face was the same, but now there was no mystery, no fear. He didn't speak, just watched me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The moment I saw him, I realized something. He was me. He had always been me. You've been free for so long. What's next? He said quietly. The voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. A question I didn't want to answer. I don't know. I whispered, the weight of my own uncertainty closing in on me. You'll always have the answers. They're inside of you. He said, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, compassion. But the compassion didn't comfort me. It terrified me. It felt like a trap, something I couldn't escape from. I stood there, unable to move, as the man, or the reflection of me, stared at me with those eyes. You can go back, you know. He said. Back. The word echoed in my mind. No, I said, shaking my head, my heart pounding. The man smiled, a sad, knowing smile. You can never leave. Not fully. The air around me grew heavier, more suffocating. It felt like I was being drawn into the system once again. I stepped back, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do. How could I break free if I had never truly escaped? The world around me began to flicker again. The edges of reality became soft, blurred. The man faded into the darkness, leaving me alone once more. I didn't know if I could escape this time. Would I ever escape? I closed my eyes, trying to clear my mind, but the answers didn't come. Instead, I felt the pull again, something inside me calling me back, calling me to the cycle. And for the first time, I didn't resist. I let go. I woke up again, but this time, it felt different. The cycle had not started again, but I had. The road was empty. The man was gone. I was standing alone in the world. The system had shattered, but I was still here. This was my rebirth. I was no longer a prisoner to the cycle. The questions no longer plagued me. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first entered the system. I had come to understand the truth. The system was inside me, and I had broken it. The world around me was mine to shape. But freedom came with a price. Now, I had to rebuild myself from the fragments I had left. The world I walked in was still foreign, still unreal in many ways. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had become something new. I was the creator now. I controlled my own story. I understood the power of choice. It had always been mine, buried deep within me, and now I was free to shape my destiny. But as I walked forward, I knew that freedom was not the absence of choice. It was the acceptance of responsibility. I wasn't just escaping anymore. I was living. The journey ahead would not be easy. I still had much to learn. I still had to build, to grow, and to confront the echoes of my past. But now, I was ready. I had escaped the system, and now, I was free to live. The road ahead was long. But for the first time in my life, it was mine.